Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot, welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running, State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running, State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week, we have a great conversation with one of the most important pioneers of women's distance running, Jacqueline Hansen. Jaqi won the 1973 Boston Marathon, probably her best-known victory, but also set 2 world records in the women's marathon, becoming the first woman under 2:45 and then going under 2:40. She also has quite an amazing story about how she qualified for the 1984 U.S. Olympic Marathon trials on the absolute last possible day.
And Jackie wasn't just a great athlete and competitor. She was also a key organizer with the International Runners Committee that worked through social and political channels to change the International Olympic Committee. The Runners Committee argued, hey, thanks for the marathon, IOC, but women also deserve a 5,000, a 10,000, and even a steeplechase in the Olympics as well. It took a little while, as we know, but eventually the IRC was successful on all fronts. But before speaking with Jackie, Amby and I want to review the biggest recent running news. Amby, what caught your attention lately?
Well, for me, a really big development was that the U.S. finally has a third runner in the Olympic marathon in Paris this summer. That's Leonard Korir, who finished third in the Olympic marathon trials, but didn't at that point hit a qualifying time for the Olympics. He was finally let in last week when World Athletics slightly expanded the size of the men's marathon field. So good for Leonard and good for the U.S. team now with 3 tough competitors. Speaking of an Olympic marathon in Paris, I just realized something quite interesting and curious. There's going to be a people's marathon on the Paris Olympic course at 9 p.m. at night during the Olympics. It'll happen the evening between the men's marathon on August 10th and the women's marathon the next morning on the 11th. This is the first for the Olympics, and I think it's a great idea. Third, and there seems to be a lot of news this week, George, WebCo and World Athletics just added an Ultimate Championship, that's their new name, to an annual track and field meet that's scheduled for 2026 for the first time. That means there's going to be a major track meet every year. Otherwise, 2026 would have been a year off between 2 world championships. And this new Ultimate Championship will cram all the action into just 3 days instead of the 10 that you see at the Olympics and the World Championships. And the winner of each event will receive $150,000. That's not bad. It compares with $50,000 in the Olympics and $70,000 at the World Championships. So you know the really great athletes are going to show up. George, there was a lot of running in New York City this weekend. Did you get to take in any of it yourself?
Yeah, I did, Abby. It was a big weekend. A couple of events on Saturday. We had the 52nd running of the old mini marathon, the 10K for women, a race you know well. And it was a glorious day in the park. The winner, Semberi Teferi of Ethiopia, who won her 3rd consecutive mini. No small feat with a very strong elite field. She missed her course record of 30:12, but it was a super performance. And then on Sunday, I was out at Randall's Island for the New York Grand Prix, and it was just a wonderful day for a track meet. And the highlight, clearly the performance of the day, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone, who's the 400-meter hurdles champion, Olympic champion, world record holder, a true phenom. She ran the 400 flat. Ambi, she looks like she is so ready for Paris. She ran away from a good field. I've never seen such a big gap between first and the rest of the field in a 400-meter race. She just missed by a couple of hundredths of a second the American record. She is ready, it seems to me, in every way for Paris. But what really I loved about this track meet was the festive carnival atmosphere among the fans. What a reminder as to how terrific track and field can be when you've got an energized and knowledgeable fan base of people, a lot of them wearing Jamaican colors, as you can imagine, here in New York, and cheering on their favorites. And of course, no one excites the crowd more than Noah Lyles, and he performed at a high level, running away with the 200. And, he just creates all kinds of energy and excitement around him. So a great stepping stone toward the Paris Olympics in that meet. But also looking ahead to the Olympic trials in Paris, I watched the NCAA women's track meet on television, and boy, there were some standout performances. The two that really caught everyone's attention: Mackenzie Long, a sprinter from Ole Miss, winning the 100 and the 200. There's a name to remember. I think she's a great bet for Paris to make the U.S. Olympic team, which is going to be a very difficult sprint team to make. But Mackenzie Long is the one you want to keep your eye on there, right from college to the Olympics. And then we've talked a lot in the distances in the last year about Parker Valby of Florida. She gets a lot of attention, and she lived up to all of it, winning the 5,000, winning the 10,000. She gets out there, she takes the lead, she runs the races by herself, and I think she's got a great shot too. And she's only a junior in college, but to make the Olympic teams. Two names that I think we'll be looking for in the upcoming Olympic trials. So I think that's the biggest recent running news from Running State of the Sport.
Now let's turn to Jacqueline Hansen, this week's guest at the Running State of the Sport podcast. Jaqi is truly one of the pioneers of women's distance running in the U.S. and globally. She's best known as the 1973 Boston Marathon winner and also a two-time holder of the women's world record in the marathon. But she worked tirelessly behind the scenes for many years and in the courtroom even to promote women's long-distance running. Jaqi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Hi, Ambi. Hi, George. It's so good to be with you.
So, Jaqi, let me add my welcome as well. It's great to have you. Let's start out for our listeners with a little snapshot of your present-day life, how old you are, where you're living, what you do, basically, to fill up the hours of your day.
Thank you. Yes, my schedule is pretty full all the time, still going. Use it or lose it, right? So I'm still living in Topanga after about 45 plus years. I'm 75 years old. I have a full-time job and I have part-time teaching, both of which are at Loyola Marymount University in the School of Education. So in addition to that, in my free time, I do volunteer coaching and I go to running clinics and I go to running events and do some podcasts like this one. Thank you.
Jaqi, we're always happy to hear about people who are, let's say, in the 50-plus generation who are keeping busy with all the things that are in front of us and that we can still do so actively. We know that you just returned from an important 40th anniversary in Olympia, Washington. That was the anniversary of the 1984 Olympic marathon trials, famously won by Joan Benoit shortly after her surgery. Could you tell us what was it like emotionally for those women and yourselves to come back and bond together after 40 years?
Yes, Amby, it was our 40th reunion, and we all looked forward to it for months. And between 40 and 50 of us showed up this time. It was very similar to one we held 5 years ago on our 35th in 2019. And we attended receptions and a banquet with some of the original members of the organizing committee, including Laurel James, famously enough, who was the race director, the one who brought the event to Olympia. And we were mostly the gatherings with the local dignitaries, like the governor's mansion. We would be mostly a private reunion. But I think that the new thing this year, as opposed to 5 years ago, is that we were celebrated by the local running committee. And the theme they put forward was inspiring generations. And I thought it was really, really nice because we were mingling with the younger generation, and some of our reunion runners participated in panel discussions with some of the local runners and coaches. And Desi Linden came, and they had a shakeout run with her and Joan Benoit leading the way, which was great. And we all participated on 3 different panels throughout the day, and the theme went on. So it was kind of like theme number 1 was the history, and theme number 2 was what motivated us then and motivates women runners now. And the third panel, of course, talked about the future. You know, they even included Jack Daniels and coaching methods and things like that. So mostly you would know Laurel James and Joni and Desi, which just gives you an indication of what a great event it was that day.
So, Jackie, the 1984 trials and Olympics came probably a half a dozen years after your peak, when you were setting world records in the marathon and winning big races like Boston. So, did you try to qualify to run in the 84 trials? And how did all that go for you?
Well, George, you could say that again. Come hell or high waters, I was going to those trials no matter what, and it almost killed me. But what happened was the marathon was lobbied into the Olympic program. It became my goal to get to those trials, except I had a few hurdles along the way. So beginning with hamstring surgery in November of 83, because I couldn't finish any marathon to get my qualifying time. I had to get my qualifying time like everybody else, right? And I had to have surgery on the hamstring. It was fortunately compartment syndrome, was not a great big deal surgery to recover from, but that's another story. And then began my quest for qualifying time in January. It cramped up a little bit. I slowed down. I missed by a lot. Ran another one in February or March, and I thought I was running conservatively, and my training partner sped up, but no, she didn't speed up. I slowed down and missed by less than 2 minutes. And at this point, the doctors and my coach are having a powwow. Do we dare let her try again? Well, yes, they did. They knew that it wasn't wise, but I had done no damage. So guess what? April was the last qualifying sanctioned race at Boston. On the last day, you could qualify. So it all came together in Boston that April. And as it were, and I will probably talk about the International Runners Committee and our lawsuit a little bit more later, but the lawsuit went to court for the first time that day. The lawsuit was to we had the marathon in, and now we were suing for the 5 and 10. Everything happened on the very same day in Boston in April. And the lawsuit went to court, and I went to Boston. the ACLU and the lawyers and other committee members could go to court, and it wasn't a hearing. They didn't need me. I had to qualify. Get to Boston, and it's a hailstorm. I would say it was probably one of the worst weather days until 2018 pushed us off the chart. But it was bad. And my roommate was from Florida, and we were sporting tans from training in the sun. And we're ready to cry. But we told each other, you don't have anything to lose, to try. The only losing is to not try. And we didn't fly all that way for nothing. So I get out there, and about halfway, I figure I'm on pace, and this is terrific. They're giving us, I hadn't been there in 11 years. And oh, by the way, ABC sent 2 news crews to follow me around all day. One was on the theme of 11 years ago, she won Boston. Can she do it again? And I told them, well, that's probably not in the picture. And the second one was her lawsuit's in court today. And so I had these 2 different news crews following me around with a microphone. And no, I will not stop at Wellesley to answer questions. No, I will not run with a microphone. Excuse me very much. And if you can catch a picture of me out there, fine, but I'm not stopping. I mean, reporters just don't get it, do they? So I get all the way to mile 20. I get halfway, and I realize I'm on pace, because in the old days, remember, Amby, you only got your splits entering a town, and they were meaningless splits. And here was the first time I had splits every 5 kilometers, and I'm on pace. I'm doing fine. I get all the way to mile 20, or 25, I get all the way to mile 25, and I see a clock that said I'm in 10th place, and my projected finish time is 2:44. Now remember, I'm just trying to break 2:50 to get a qualifying time. So of course I think I am fine, right? Hallelujah. I'm on pace. I'm going to make it. But I'm kind of wondering, how did they do that? I've never seen a clock or a leaderboard before like that. But Dave McGilvray has confirmed that later, that yes, that existed. Within 100 yards, I'm losing vision. I'm getting tunnel vision, and I'm fighting to stay upright, and I feel like I'm going to fall forward into the sidewalk face first. And I'm going, what is happening to me? And that's that, and the thought process of, I don't know, it's like grieving, goes through a process. And I'm at the anger stage, like, what is going on? I have got to finish this race. I have 1 mile to go, and I'm really, really mad. And then I start bargaining, and I start pleading, like, let me finish this race. I just really need to finish. And I haven't worked on this marathon for 10 years for nothing. I have got to go to the trials. I deserve to finish, and that's really the last thought I had, was that little mantra in my head. I deserve to finish. I deserve to finish. I deserve to finish. And then I wake up on a hospital cot with dog tags around my neck and rolled up in a wool blanket. And I look at my watch, and it's still running. The doctor is yammering at me. Hey, your body temperature, young lady, your body temperature is below 93, and we're keeping you here for observation, yada, yada, yada. I looked at him and said, did I finish? And what was my time?
What was my time?
That I needed to know. And I really needed to know. And he looked at the nurse, and he made a joke. So I knew I was okay, because he made a joke saying, hey, nurse, she's dying here, but she would like to know her time first. Can you go find out? And I thought, okay, he wouldn't make jokes if it was true, so I must be okay. And then he went on, she went to find out, and he went on about the where's your clothes? And I said, hey, I didn't send any clothes to the finish line. I wore everything. And I was just going to jog back to the hotel for a hot shower. So they let me wear the wool blanket home. And she showed up and said I had run a high 2:47 in 14th place. So if you do the math, let's round up to 2:48. I lost 4 minutes and 4 places in the last mile, which I will never remember. However, I did meet the man later who picked me up before my face hit the sidewalk, and that was Bruce Palmer of Nike, the New Zealander marathoner guy. And we had a reunion in the last 5 years, which was kind of fun. So that's my story. And I get to the nearest phone. We didn't have cell phones then. I get to the phone and I call home to say, book those tickets to Olympia. We are going to Olympia. And they said, you've got a phone call from Julie Card of the LA Times. Call her back urgent. I did. We lost in court that day. I went from the highest high to the lowest low in 1 minute. But of course, that was just the first of many court battles, and you can lose a battle and still win the war, right? And we did. But in that moment, it was the highest high and the lowest low. It's always drama for me in Boston.
Well, I think it'd be pretty easy to settle and focus on the high, Jackie, because nobody deserved to be in Olympia more than you did. And you controlled what you could control by finishing that race, and you couldn't control the courtroom from that distance. You lived to fight that one another day. Let's go back earlier in your career, because maybe you get tired of hearing the word pioneer. I'm not sure. But you were there in the earliest days of marathon running for women. And we know that there were rules that said you couldn't. We know that there were social pressures. We know that there were physicians who said your uterus would drop out or whatever it was. Could you tell us what it was like to be a marathon runner in those days?
Well, yes, I can. I certainly can. And pre-marathon, if I may go there. But because I learned a little lesson in high school, my senior year, last semester of my senior year, to get out of PE, which I hated. I signed up for the first track team our school ever had, because the new PE teacher came to town and said, why do the boys have a track team and the girls don't? Dixie Griffin was her name, and she taught me to ask why, or why not. We were only allowed to run 440 yards. I wasn't even good enough to go to the city meet. Like she said later, when she lived long enough to know that I finally succeeded at something. And she said, yeah, I knew you were no sprinter. So there was that. That was my first introduction. And then a woman named Judy Graham I met randomly running around my campus, who also ran. See, we were pre-Title IX. We were pre-NC2A. We were pre-girls high school sports. Which out here is CIF. So we found each other, and miraculously, and she said, hey, I have a coach and I have a club and you can join. Join the club. I'm a miler. We're running 1 mile on the track at the maximum, and we're running maximum 2 miles at cross country. But I had a teammate named Cheryl Bridges, and Cheryl was running a marathon after our cross country season, and I'd never seen a marathon. So she was my first introduction to the marathon. First marathon I ever watched, and here's a woman breaking 2:50 for the first time in history and sets a world record. And there you are. I was hooked. It was like, if Cheryl can do that, I can do that. Well, Cheryl had a few name changes. You might not recognize Bridges, which she ran as, but then after that name, she was Flanagan, which you might recognize as Shalane's mom. And so I say, if not for Cheryl, there'd be no Shalane, and I don't know who I'd be. That was my next introduction. So I get to run my first marathon a year later, only I didn't exactly prepare for it. I went to my coach at the end of cross country season, and I said, oh yeah, remember that marathon? It's in 2 weeks. Can I run that? Because even as a grown woman, I had a coach who you had to ask permission for. And for whatever reason, he let me run it, maybe to get it out of my system. Maybe, as he said, I'm the most stubborn runner he ever had. I don't know why he let me run it, but I did cross the finish line, said never again, until they put that medal around my neck. And I'm thinking, if I actually trained for this thing, maybe I would do better. And Cheryl didn't show up that day. That's why I got to win. And so that began it. And you're right, there were no official divisions for women until about that point. So see, I'm the recipient of the first pioneers and their efforts, because Bobby Gibb had already crashed Boston Marathon 3 years in a row, and then Sarah May 3 years in a row, and they were allowed to run. They just weren't recognized, and their times weren't recorded, and they didn't get, an award. Cheryl was allowed to run, and so she had already opened that door at my home course. And then a friend of mine, a teammate who went to Yale, said, they just let women run Boston officially. They have a division for them as of this year. It was 1972. And he said, you just won Culver City. You should go to Boston. I said something like, what's in Boston? And that was thanks to Nina Kusick. That was thanks to Nina Kusick, who had worked through both the RRCA and the AAU to get an official division. And she fittingly won that first year that they were official. So see, I've already had some little bit older pioneers who were helping me find my way, right? So I go off to Boston for my second road race, my second marathon, and guess what? I won. So then I get to go off to West Germany to run the first international marathon for women, thanks to Dr. Ernest von Achen, a sports medicine doctor who had pushed the Olympic Committee through his efforts in Europe to get the 800 meter back in 1960, to get the 1500 meter added for women in 1972. And now he was working on the women's marathon. And this was a display of, hey, women from all around the world can run a marathon and do it well. So, he's kind of our unsung hero you don't hear much about. But I was the beneficiary there too. The AAU wouldn't put me on the USA team because I had not gone to their nationals. That's too long a story to go into at the moment. But a kind teammate of my husband's named Bruce Dern, the actor, well, he said, you should go. You definitely need to be there. I'll send you. So he sponsored me and sent me, and I wore a plain red shirt. So I didn't have a USA uniform. And I came in first American and broke 3 hours for the first time. So I'm on my way, right? I'm on my way. And then I came home with enough confidence that I can run with the best in the world. And I set my first world record back on Culver City, and I ran with Bruce. And then a year later, I've set the second world record. So I didn't have to crash any courses, but I'm still limited. And you're right about women. We didn't even get equal awards for a few years because most marathons, even though they now added a division, a lot of marathons kept the practice of only the top 10 bodies across the finish line get medals, and that was always men. So it took a little bit more to get our separate medals, but, and it went on and on and on, and the rest is history.
So, Jackie, you say the rest is history, quite a build-up, but now we're getting to you becoming the first woman to break 240, obviously setting the world record. Tell us about that.
My most perfect peak performance. We didn't have sports medicine in those days. We didn't have sports psychology for sure, but I've studied it ever since. I had a peak performance, absolutely effortless, euphoric, felt like I could turn around on the finish line and do it all over again. I had the sense of no time passing. At the same time, I heard every mile split and I could do that math. Usually I can't do the math on the run, but that year, that race, I did the math and I get all the way to 20 miles and I realize I'm on world record pace, and I actually sped up and had negative splits trying to take that record down. You realize I had the world record a year before. I lost it to my German and French counterparts and then wanted it back, right? So I averaged 6:02 a mile. My first, I think my slowest mile was probably early on in 6:08, but those last 6 miles, the last 10K were 5:55s. So I don't know that I've ever run negative splits before or since, but but that race was right on. And I chose Eugene, Oregon, because it was going to be the men's Olympic trials for Montreal Olympics the next year. So I knew it would be flat, it would be fast, it could be cool, it could be rainy, it'd be perfect conditions, and it would be accurate. And all of that came to fruition.
And Jackie, let's note that your final time was 2:38.10, so you were well under that 2:40 barrier. Yeah, okay. You were well under 2:40, and it was a record smasher for sure. You know, I don't know if you are the type who might occasionally live with regret or not, but if there had been a women's Olympic marathon in 1976 the next year, you would have been a favorite. You might have won a gold medal. Do you ever think about that?
Yes, is the short answer. In the moment, even going home on the plane, people, with a trophy, people are saying, you must be the favorite for the Olympics next year. And I go, well, not exactly, because they don't have my event, but that began my activism chapter of life. I wanted to go to Montreal. I thought we could change things in a year. I hoped that. And let's be honest, Amby, I'll never say that I was a sure thing for the gold medal. But I at least deserved the chance to try to chase it. And it did launch my activism, and I can say that I'm maybe only a world record holder and never an Olympian, but I don't live with regrets. That's wasted energy. It was worth more than any record to be part of the change. If you have the opportunity
Jackie,
to make a change, that's worth it.
Jackie, I want to move into your activism phase, which is an important part of your story. You were a founder of the International Runners Committee that did lobby for women's running. And what was the specific mission of the IRC? How did it go about getting things done?
Well, yes, my husband had gone to work for Nike temporarily, and it was the brainchild of the women's rep, Pam McGee, to, hey, what would it take to get your wife to the Olympics? And every other woman. And she thought we should combine efforts. And Joe Henderson, my husband Tom, and me came together and co-founded the International Runners Committee, and included a whole lot of activists and advocates throughout our sport, including Nina Kusik, including Doris Brown Heritage. We had representative women from Brazil and England, Henley Gabot from the Roadrunners Club, Joan Olliott from, the doctor's point of view, because she was a practicing doctor and often wrote books and articles on why women are not the weaker sex. And we had a statistician, and we had Jeff Darman, president of the RRCA, who knew lobbyists. And we came together. We had meetings, and we also learned. We hired a lobbyist to come in and teach us how to do this. And the lobbyist was actually somebody who had been involved in the Act of Congress when the AAU became track and field, or whatever they were, TAC, and now they're USATF. So we had people who knew the system on the inside, and we studied the IOC charter, and we lobbied and went to meetings and petitioned, it was then IAAF, which is now World Athletics. So we did a lot of work. We did our homework, and it was not just me. Maybe I got to be the point guard, but I had a great team around me. And while we worked and lobbied and petitioned and all those kind of things, we were threatening lawsuit the whole time. The marathon went in. I'll try to make this as brief as possible because it's a very, very long story. You can read my book, but it was through the lobbying efforts of not only us, but other women and other organizations pushing for that marathon. that it went in first. It went in first. I can briefly explain that why the event, all our distance events went in backwards. Remember, our mission was 5,000 meters, 10,000 meters, and marathon. The marathon went in first. It's popular. Women are running that all over the world. And my best guess is TV rights had something to do with it. Because by the time the marathon got lobbied in, and we knew it was a done deal when they came to LA for the vote, because they didn't want to do the vote the year before in Moscow when we were boycotting. And one of our inside guys on the USOC got it tabled to come to LA for a friendly vote, knew it was going in. So I went down there to meet with the president and the secretary of our IAAF to plead for the 5 and 10. And that discussion did not go well. And I learned that it is not about the rules of the IOC charter, which we had satisfied all the rules and I had all the proof. I got told in my face, your races are boring. They won't sell tickets at the games. We could care less and they're never going in. So forget about it. And I had heard a radio report by the women. The ACLU had commissioned the Women's Sports Foundation to do a study on the Olympic Games coming to LA with the result that we only had 1/3 of the events the men had. I couldn't call them up fast enough to tell them, I don't know about these other sports, but let me tell you about mine. And I laid it out. And they gave me a mission. I don't know whether they were testing my resolve, I suppose, but they also wanted to make sure we had jumped through all the hoops before they took action. And I ended up going back to Nike, and with their resources, I found and received back more than 70 letters, right to sue letters from women in 30 different countries who were the ranked 5 and 10,000 meter distance runners in their countries. So I was essentially laying out the field. I've already built the field. If you guys will just put the 5 and 10 in the Olympics, we've already identified who they are. And that was the basis for our lawsuit, because in the state of California, we have strong anti-discrimination laws. You cannot use publicly owned buildings for discriminatory purposes, which we proved in court, and it went on from there. So the lawsuit basically addressed
Jackie?
5 and 10. Yes?
Jackie, we know you didn't win immediately, but the arc of history and moral justice was always on your side, and in the long run, you did win, and the work was well worth it. Let's talk about a certain Olympic marathon in Los Angeles in 1984. You weren't running. It was past your prime in 76 or so. But a dear friend of yours was running, and you were very close to her race and the entire scene that day. Could you tell us briefly what that day in 1984 was like for you personally?
Thank you, Amby. I know in my journal, it was like, finally, this day has arrived. Is it really true? Is it really happening? It was, I housed Joni. I was living in an apartment at the time. Our house was being remodeled here in the canyon. So I housed Joni right on the course. She had her own guest house of a neighbor of ours who was one of my lawyer friends from the lawsuit. So she had her own guest house. She could step out onto San Vicente Boulevard. Nobody wanted to stay down in USC at the Village. There's nowhere to run down there. So I put quite a lot of distance runners. I found homes for them all over Santa Monica. I was a volunteer. My husband, Tom, was the co-race director of both marathons until Peter Uberoth discovered he was married to me and fired him. What Peter doesn't know is they couldn't let him go. Yeah, they could. He was really mad at me, Amby. He was really mad at me. I mean, so what if he had to do some deposition? Big deal. But he was really mad at me for the lawsuit. So I had to have a no-name job, or I wouldn't have been allowed. I had to have a low enough volunteer job with no name attached to it. So I found the one that kept me with the girls all day long. So I could go with Joni to the start. I could be on the bus. I could hang out in the locker room. I collected their bags and I took them to the finish line, and I could be right there with them all day long. It was the perfect job for me. Remember, I qualified for those trials. I always say at 36 years old with a 4-year-old child. So that's well beyond my peak. And somebody dropped my son off to me at the Coliseum so he could witness this with me. Even before Joni came into the stadium, the crowd was roaring, just roaring. We could see it on the Jumbotron. And we're on our feet and we're screaming, and I'm crying as she comes into the tunnel and comes out onto the track. And my son starts to wail at the noise. He's scared. He's 4 years old. And I said, honey, this is okay. This is fine. These are happy tears. And look, there's your friend Joni about to win a gold medal. Do you know what he said? He said, well, she's not as fast as Carl Lewis. No, we're going to talk when we get home. But yes, she's winning a gold medal. Carl can't run that far. That was so. I figured, oh my gosh, I've got to give him a little education when we get home. But she graciously, up until then, none of the neighbors knew who she was. She could go out the door anonymously and go for a run every day, right? Well, that day they were lined up for autographs when we got home. It cracked me up. So she kindly took us. Her host was Cheryl Kushner, the lawyer, and myself and our families. We all went to a celebratory dinner with her that night. Compliments of her Dole sponsors, which was quite nice and quite generous of her. And can I tell you what happened the next morning? George, you were there.
Of course.
The next morning we go out for a run, and I think, okay, I can finally keep up with her. Maybe she's got a marathon in her legs. Oh no, she ran 12 miles. We ran down San Vicente. We picked up George, and we bumped into other people like Gabrielle Anderson, who was absolutely fine after her, near collapse at the finish. And we ran all the way to the Venice Pier and back, and she never slowed down. I think she was running on adrenaline and on cloud 9.
It was fast. Don't forget the race she won the day before was hot and difficult conditions. I thought running with you guys that day would be one of those, recovery runs, but not Joni.
No, I was out of breath. I could hardly keep up. But weren't we all happy? And I kept thinking, little girls all over the world are watching her on TV, knowing they can grow up to be marathoners. She started that next running boom for sure for women.
Jackie, our podcast is called Running State of the Sport. So that is a question that we ask many of the people who come on with us. The question is, how do you perceive running the state of the sport now? What's good about it? What's not as good as it could be? And particularly from your women's running perspective, what are your thoughts?
Wow. I do have quite the perspective, being a child of the 70s. And
excellent.
I totally want to see. I'm really happy that women now hold up half the sky. That's a great thing. I know that all the statistics I've read in the last few years have all proven and shown that women are usually 50% or more of most road races. And I know as a coach for charity runners for a decade that I always really had a majority of women who were running for a cause and to train for a marathon. So that's all fine and well. A lot of things happened in the 70s that I would like to see protected and maintained and not erased or destroyed. And I'm going to say, I want to see fair play. I want to see the intent of Title IX maintained and carried on that the activists of the 70s fought so hard for. I want to see the female division continue to be protected. I follow a few activists, I guess we would call them advocates for women's sports, like Doriane Lambelet, who was a Swiss 800-meter Olympian, but she trained and grew up here in Santa Monica, so I got to know her. And I know she's spoken before Congress on the Equal Protection Act. And I know that she does a lot of work and publications along with people like the Olympic swimmer Nancy Hogshead. I follow them and I read their research, I read their articles, and I keep abreast. In fact, your group, Amby, that you created us, the First Ladies of Running, we continue to have Zoom meetings, and one time we invited Doriane to come give us an education about women's sports today. So we're keeping current, and we're hoping that all our hard work of the 70s that it lasts, that it continues to grow from there, that it launches something, that we don't lose our way. So I would like to see Title IX affirmed and so on and so forth, as I said. But that would be worth another whole podcast, wouldn't it?
Jackie, you've already...
Yes.
Jackie, you've already kind of given us a sense of it, but we always ask our interviewees, if they'll give us their fairy godmother wishes. And that's 3 wishes. Most people are sort of confined to running, but, we're going to let you be open-ended as you want. Any 3 wishes that you have for sport, women's running, yourself, your life, the Olympics. Give us a few here.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Sure. There was a time from the 70s on, I would say, the benchmark will be if women get equal coverage in the sports section like the men do. And I think I said it because one time I put on a 10K race in the rain and we didn't get on the sports page. We got on the special interest page, wet t-shirt run. And that made me crazy. So I've always thought we need equal coverage. Ask us the same questions you would ask the men, not how we look and not what we wore, not how we feel. Please just give us equal coverage. Well, now we do hold up half the sky, and I believe prize money is pretty much an even Steven deal, most races, and for men and women, I would like to see equal prize money deeper down the line. Like you can make a living being 22nd in golf, but not in running. So there's that wish. And I worked the majority of my adult life in youth sports. I was working LA 84 Foundation, program director for lots of running events for kids and lots of grant making. I would like to see coaching education more everywhere, and I would like to see all youth coaches certified, mandatory certified. Sometimes your babysitters have more certification than your coaches, and they're spending a lot of time with your kids. I'd like to see certification for all youth coaches in all sports everywhere, and more coaching education for everybody. And then my last one, well, I was thinking about this. Why is WADA and USADA always playing catch up? Why are the drug cheaters always one step ahead of them and they're always playing catch up? I'd like to see that resolved. I would like to see, better and more consistent and less cheaters. How's that?
Those are all wishes that all of us, George and I, and I'm sure all of our listeners would like to have come true also. And that's it for our podcast today with Jacqueline Hansen. Jackie, thank you so much for joining us.
It was my absolute honor and pleasure. This was time well spent with 2 legends and personal friends in my life. Thank you very much.
Amby, that was a terrific conversation with Jacqueline Hansen. There aren't too many women runners who've contributed as much for as many years as she has. What struck you about her comments today?
George, I was particularly interested to hear about the 40th anniversary celebration the women just had in Olympia, Washington, because I was lucky enough to be there as a journalist covering it in 1984. And boy, it was such a special, unique, one-of-a-kind event. It was terrific. It's great that Joan Benoit was there for the 40th anniversary. Of course, she's always been terrific at acknowledging the pioneer women runners like Jacqueline and the roles that they played. I was also glad to hear that Jack Daniels attended. He's the former Nike physiologist. He's 90 now. He's the guy who put an inverted bicycle over Joni's head after her surgery, and he told her she could at least get in some kind of workout by pedaling the bike with her hands and arms while it was inverted above her. There was no special equipment back then, but Jack was always the best at figuring out innovative training for runners. I also really liked Jackie's story about the first marathon she ever saw in 1971. A little bit before then, she didn't even know there was a marathon distance. But she turned out to watch a woman run named Cheryl Bridges, who won the Culver City Western Hemisphere Marathon that year. And a few years later, Cheryl gave birth to a little girl named Shalane Flanagan, only one of the greatest American distance runners of all time. It was great that the women in the 1970s, like Jacqueline Hansen and Cheryl Bridges, they may have been few and far behind, but boy, they were supportive of each other. They rallied together and told each other to go for it. And that's how they went so far and gained so much in such a short time. How about you, George? Did you have any thoughts on Jacqueline's comments?
Yeah, her recollections of the historic women's 1984 first Olympic marathon women, I love that. She obviously had a front row seat. Joni was her house guest staying with her. They rode out to the start together to the race. And just her, recalling all the excitement of the day. And then I loved it when Tony was from the field and was entering the statement to this huge noise, and Jackie was there with her then 4-year-old son, and Jackie was crying from the emotion of it all, and her son began to wail, and he was crying, and she was saying, "That's our friend Joni, and she's going to win the gold medal," and her 4-year-old son said, "Yeah, she's not as fast as Carl Lewis." And she said, "Well, I've got to get home and talk to him about that." But I said to him, she can run a lot further than he can. Jackie's just got great stories, and she's a wonderful storyteller for sure.
And there's nothing quite like a 4-year-old for a bit of a pearl of wisdom in that situation. So that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward.